travel deep inside the imagination of a romance author, and you may end up in some exotic location, reunited with a long-lost love who also happens to be a millionaire. Our next guest is very familiar with that scenario as she has written 7 novels. Author Nancy Loyan Schuemann is the past president and a current member of the Northeast Ohio chapter of the Romance Writers of America, and she's here to share more on her journey through writing. Welcome to the program, Nancy.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's an honor being here.
You know, first off, I have to say I didn't know there was a Romance Writers of America chapter, and I have never met a romance author. I think you're the first one. How did you get started, and how did you fall into this genre?
Well, basically, I got started writing. When I was in elementary school, I penned picture books for fellow students. I was an avid fan of reading fairy tales. And fairy tales are basically children's happily ever after romance novels. And I gravitated to Barbara Cartland, then Danielle Steele, and I decided I can write this myself. So then I started writing my own novels. But of course, life gets in the way. You go to college, you get a job. But then I went full circle and became a freelance author. An opportunity came up where I was commissioned to write a book for the city of South Euclid, and this became my first book. Of course, it's not a romance, it's a little more historical. That led to bigger things: Cleveland, Ohio, a photographic portrait. It's a coffee table book on the city of Cleveland. And then finally, I was able to go back to my favorite genre, romance and women's fiction. My first novel I had published is Paradise Found. It was with a small publisher. It's a story that takes place in the exotic Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean, a multicultural romance. And basically, that publisher went out of business, and I went to self-publish. Well, of course, it took like 20 years for me to land a publishing contract with a big publisher. A division of Adams Media, which does Writer's Digest books and others, started a romance line called Crimson Romance. And I was contracted with them for 5 novels. Well, as life would happen, my editor left and the new editor had a different focus. Since my books had been out several years, I decided that I wanted the rights back. And luckily, I was able to procure the rights back, and I was able to self-publish those books in addition to several new books.
Now let's talk about some of your titles. They're a little bit unique and not your typical romance title that you see in the bookstore. Lab Test, can you tell our audience about that?
Okay, basically I'm a little unusual. I'm a romance author, but I'm also a little women's fiction, which means that instead of just focusing on the hero and heroine, I have secondary characters, I have more advanced plots, secondary plots, and I'm a little more quirky in detail. And probably quirky is the word for Lab Test, because Lab Test deals with a black Labrador retriever who's basically a girl that was turned into a dog. She's adopted by the hero, and she's a voyeur into his life. Well, of course, don't worry. She turns into a human when they have a relationship, but it's a humorous paranormal. And that's what sort of sets me apart, is I don't just write one genre. I have humorous paranormal. I just re-released a time travel called Wishes and Tears that goes back to the great San Francisco earthquake. I have several mystery suspense novels. One is still with Crimson Romance. It's called Special Angel. It's about a reporter unraveling the mystery of the world's greatest singer.
Now, you wrote one about a safe. These seem like different subjects. How did you know the background on how safes work?
Well, they say...
And that's called the right combination, correct?
Yeah, well, they say write about what you know or what you want to know. So I'm a little unusual. My husband and I collect antique safes, and we've done so from before we were married. And I used to write about antique safes for a trade publication. So I use my knowledge in mystery suspense. It's about a serial killer who is tracking safecrackers. And my hero's an FBI agent who's out to find him.
Is there a common thread in all of your books? They seem each one seems so unique.
Though they're unique, my tagline is sort of unlocking the barriers to romance, because each of my novels unlocks a barrier. It's either socioeconomic, racial, interspecies with Lab Test, the time travel, and A Kiss in the Rain, my latest release that I self-published, it's about reuniting lovers from the past. It's another serial killer story. Here's an FBI agent who goes to the Chautauqua Institution to find a black widow who's preying on lonely old men. And I've taught writing at the institution. This will be my 10th year as an instructor. My book's available there. I've had a book signing, and so I know it well, and that was a really fun book to write.
How does writing fulfill you as a creative person?
Well, I'm rather creative in so many different ways, but writing is something that I always say is like breathing. It's something I've always had to do my whole life. I just can't imagine not doing it. I mean, even if I was never published, in which for 20 years I wasn't in fiction, I still wrote because it's just something I just feel in my heart. I have stories to tell and I want to tell them, or my characters tell me what stories they want me to write, and I write them.
What would you suggest for someone who wants to get started, that has the same passion as you do?
Basically, with writing, you have to sit down and write. If you write 1 page a day in 365 days, you have a novel. But for advice, there are a lot of local and national resources. I teach Romance Writing 101 for the Cuyahoga County Public Library's Writers Center at the branch in South Euclid-Lyndhurst. I'm also a member of the Northeast Ohio chapter of Romance Writers of America. Romance Writers of America is the largest trade organization of romance authors and the oldest, and it's international. They have over 12,000 members. And they have a local chapter which meets monthly in the area at different libraries. And their website is www.neorwa.com for more information on their meetings. And I highly recommend it. If you're a women's fiction or romance author or wannabe, it's a great organization for networking and support.
Well, thank you so much. And how about your web address if someone wants to reach you directly, if they want to buy one of your books?
Okay. My website is www.nlsscribe.com, and I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the social media.
Thanks for being